Okay, so let's talk now about quantitative research, right? So quantitative involves numbers, and you may have heard of a quantitative method called surveys, right? So before we get into what the different surveys are and different ways of collecting that information, let's talk about sampling, right? Which is a really important term to know when we talk about quantitative research. There are two kinds of samples. One is a probability sample, and the other one is a non-probability or a quota sample. Okay. So in a probability sample, everyone in the world has a chance, equal chance, of being selected for a survey. Okay. So really, this is also what we call a random sample. Okay. Everybody in a specific target audience has an equal chance of being selected for this survey. Okay. So let's say there is a computerized list, and I would say every ninth person on this list will be sent a survey, or every 12th person on our list will be sent a survey. Okay, so everyone has an equal chance to be selected, to be surveyed, and that is what we call a probability sample. The second one that you see there is a quota or a non-probability sample. Okay, now this is not a random sample. In this particular kind of sample, you are choosing from a specific subgroup, okay? And you're choosing from that specific subgroup that has something very similar about them. For example, age group between 30 years and 40 years, right? They have something very specific, about them. Their characteristic is that they are in that age group. All right. So what we're doing there is that we are choosing people from a specific group. All right. And so that is what we call a non-probability or a quota sample. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that you know of this term. Again, I don't teach statistics and I don't teach quantitative surveys. I'm teaching advertising research. But for you to not know what these terms are is problematic. And so I'm just bringing awareness to these terms. What is a probability sample and what is a non-probability sample? Okay. The other concept you need to know is the size of the sample that you're going to survey for your advertising research projects, right? Some sample sizes are small, some bigger sample sizes also exist. I've been part of projects where I've had 10,000 people that I needed to survey. Okay, that is ridiculously huge and is not normal. 1,000 to 1,500 people is a very good size of a survey, right? So when you send, you may have to send the survey out to many more people. 10% is sort of, the rate of completion. We tend to only take data from surveys that are actually completed. So you may have to send it out to many more people with the expectation of a 10% completion. And with that in mind, 1,000 to 1,500 people survey data, is good enough. Okay, so that is your sample size, which is something you should know. And one more term that you need to know is called incidence rate. Okay, This is a really important term. Honestly, we need to be taught this stuff a little bit earlier in our careers, and therefore I brought this in here today. I use this quite a bit, this terminology. I honestly learned it on the job, and you're lucky to learn it here. What is this term? It basically is the number of people who qualified after screening questions. Now, often when market research companies are, trying to figure out who is the right audience, who should be asking, who should we be asking these questions to? They have this really huge database, right? And then they have to figure out of this big database of people, who are the right folks, who should be the respondents to this particular survey. Okay, so they send out a screener to their database, and based on the questions they ask, they tend to figure out who fits into this particular survey and who should not take the survey. That is what we call a screener. Okay, so number of people that qualify after the screening questions is what the incidence rate is. Okay, it's the number of people from your sample pool that will qualify for your survey or your study. Now, let's say, for example, my client is a sanitary napkin or a tampon company, right? And so I would like to talk to women. Now, what does that do? If you're targeting just females for a particular survey, then our incidence rate drops from 100% to 50%, generally speaking, right? Now, so it's basically people who are eligible to participate in your study. Now, this sort of estimate, right, when we know, okay, so the incidence rate is 50%, for example, this estimate will help us guide the cost of any research project. Okay, so if the incidence rate is high, then the cost of the survey will be low once the survey is completed. So the harder it is to reach the target respondents, the more expensive the project is going to be. Okay, so this is the concept of incidence rate, and it is something that you should learn. So in this particular video, we've talked about two kinds of samplings. We've talked about what a sample size should be, and we've talked about this concept called the incidence rate.